Hello, and welcome to another episode of Getting Started.life, a show about starting new endeavors where we bring you experts to talk about the first 5 steps to starting a new endeavor and the one mistake to miss. We're on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network, which by the way, now is on the Roku channel. So look for us there. I'm going to mention it at the end as well, but really, really interesting and great expansion. So really amazing, timely subject today. And we're talking about selling your house. And great guest, good friend of mine, Julius Dickens, another West Point grad. So we share that background. And he was my realtor. So guy knows what he's doing. What do we sell my house in? What, 4 hours?
It was quick.
Yeah, it was quick.
It was
And we had a couple of different offers going on. So
yeah.
good realtor, and I really value his counsel and opinion on this kind of stuff. He's with Dreamtown Realty, right? And you're out there, Lincoln Park.
Out of Lincoln Park.
Okay, and we'll cover how they can get best hold of you at the end.
Sure.
Also, I did want to cover that today's show is sponsored by Red Leg Funding. If you're looking for investment real estate funding for your fix and flip or buy and hold rental property, check out redlegfunding.com. And Keystone Mediation, all types of mediation that you may need, reach out to Keystone Mediation. So talk a little bit first about the market, if you could, because what's crazy is when you and I started talking, different messages, I think, right? A couple of weeks, we were like, hey, we need to be on the show. Great market. Now I'm starting to see cracks in it. What do you see in the market?
We're coming off of a record time for demand versus the inventory that's out there. So it's just really thin inventory in most parts of Illinois, especially downtown, going out to the near suburbs. I've been experiencing multiple offer situations with every buyer that I have. Okay, so the expectation that you make an offer on a house, you negotiate it out, you come to some agreement, that's all out the window right now.
So it's still a tight market from a buyer perspective.
It is extremely tight, especially for single family homes. As you go towards townhomes, it's a little less tight. And condos, you can still get a deal on a condo right now.
So are you seeing, again, maybe it's sensationalism, but I'm seeing more and more anything from it's a housing bubble, it's going to pop, to kind of a soft landing, to the always interesting thing of pardon me, are values dropping, or are they increasing at a less quick pace as they were before? Right. But it seems like everybody's kind of pointing toward a slowdown.
Everyone thought that there was going to be a slowdown when the pandemic hit. Realtors were extremely afraid. I talked to a lot of people in the office, and there were a lot of people that had concerns that, the pandemic will mean the end of the real estate market. And we were all wrong. It went the other way. Demand was higher than ever. Inventory was lower than ever. And so it's really dangerous to try to call the top. It just is. It's hard to predict. Higher interest rates could bring about a slowdown in price appreciation. I'll give you that. But it's hard to call a top. I mean, I think maybe appreciation rates will come down and we'll have like more of a stable market, which I think is a good thing.
Now, I do have another question. I'm going to put a public service announcement because we're stupid and we just adopted another dog who's sitting next to me. And if he hears something, there could be barking. So if I go mute unexpectedly, my microphone's still good. So are you, though, advising people differently? Are you seeing anything with timing, with it being the late spring, early summer market? Now people are hearing, crap, there might be a lot more for sale. Are sellers approaching it differently, or are you advising them to as well?
I think it's hard to approach it differently based on what you think the market's going to be. I think it's a little easier to predict what the interest rates might look like and try to plan around that. So, if you're thinking about selling potentially next year, but you could sell today, would you rather sell into a market that has an interest rate of 5%, which is pretty much what we have right now? Or do you want to wait for it to be
up from there?
Or do you want to wait for it to be 7%? Right.
Yep.
So, I can't tell you what the demand and supply balance will look like 2 years from now. I just can't. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you that I expect personally interest rates will be markedly higher from today.
Well,
So
and just from a practical and common sense perspective, you've also got the potential of a recession. I mean, we're already seeing contracting, a couple quarters in a row.
right,
You're seeing layoffs in my industry. You're seeing the big players already start calling the game for the refinance stuff, and
yep,
they are contracting. And you're seeing a lot of people all of a sudden jobless,
right,
who are dependent upon those large companies. So that's the other thing, at least I'm factoring in when people are asking me.
yeah. Well, I think the Fed is in a tough spot. They're going to have to raise rates until they knock down demand. Well, how do you knock down demand? You cause some unemployment, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
so that's what we're headed for. Um, but again, I mean, demand for housing is higher than we've ever seen. So even
Yep.
if it comes down, does it come down to what is considered normal? I don't know. I
Yep.
don't know. But
So
I would
go.
say that it's a good idea to pull forward your plans and try to move a little bit faster, just because the Fed's going to continue to raise rates until they break something.
So it sounds like what you're saying, and then we'll get into that first step is the market isn't getting better, but it's not getting worse.
Not yet.
Okay. So that's good, right? Because that means you never want to act out of desperation. You
Right.
want to act out of deliberate movement. So let's say I'm going to sell my house, which I wouldn't because I'm in an awesome house. You know that.
Right.
But let's say I'm going to sell my house and I'm like, what is my first step, Julius?
Okay. So I think the first step really has to be to get a realtor that you know and trust. Right. You got to get somebody who can hold your hand through really what the 5 steps are, but doing it on your own is probably not advisable. And I
But
would
don't
say
you make so much more money when you FISBO?
you will probably make a mistake and you will probably regret it. But, to each his own. But I
Well,
think getting a real estate professional and getting them early is the recipe for success. You remember when you called me to talk about selling your home? We
right.
talked about it, what, 6 months early?
It was December. Yeah, no, it was earlier than that. It was November-ish. And we were like, we want to be on the market by March, April timeframe.
Right.
And there were things that we had grown accustomed to that was like, I'll fix it when I get to it. And then I remember you walked in, you're like, no, yeah, all these things.
I wasn't that rough, was I?
No, you weren't rough, but it was like, no, you gave me the real deal.
Yeah.
You gave me,
Yeah.
and that was good. Now, I think with the for sale by owner thing, it's always again, I'm going to make more money. And if you could talk 1 minute before we go on to
Mhm.
step two, is they're not adding in the loss of a subject matter expert who's being paid to do certain things. So
Right.
I'm going to say to people when they go FISBO or they don't get an attorney also, but when they go for sale by owner, they're like, "Well, aren't you going to drop the contract?" And for part of it, I can't. There's liability. Like I'm not a realtor,
Right.
so there are certain things where they're expecting other people to become utility players, which
Right.
isn't the case. If you could talk a minute about that.
So what I usually see with FISBO folks is they tend to overinflate what they need to spend to get their house ready. Okay. Either because they don't have good contractors that they don't know how to find the good contractors that are going to give them a reasonable price and a good product. And then the other part of it is some of them just don't know what to fix. They over improve certain things. They don't even address things that are deficient, and they're kind of all over the place. And that's what I see out of FISBOs for the most part. The other thing is they tend to not know what their market um, can bring as far as a price. They don't know their market. They over improve sometimes, and then they try to overprice it, and they think that the market will give it to them no matter what, and that's not the case because at the end of the day, there's an appraisal. So yeah, the FISBO thing can be tough. It can
Well,
be
and
tough.
it's
A lot of
interesting
mistakes
because
can be made.
the way you describe that, it's almost like a mini flip, right? Like, what is the ROI on what you're doing?
Exactly.
And if it's limited, I remember we were looking at my place and it was like, should I rip out the tile? I ended up regrouting everything, which
Right.
wasn't fun but it wasn't ripping out tile that likely would later maybe be ripped out again when they were like, I don't like that tile, which is
Exactly.
costly, wasteful, and stupid. So no, that's very, very, very sound advice. I was always thinking it again in terms of who's supposed to call this person? Like when the deal's in motion and they're like the realtor, and they're like, well, why didn't you do it? I don't have a realtor. I'm like, because I'm not a realtor. So even after they might even get an offer and a contract and sign everything, the fun isn't over if you go for sale by owner.
Right. There's lots of steps where things can fall apart if you're doing a FISBO.
Yep.
But enough about that. So once you get a realtor or you don't, I would say the next step should be to do a pre-inspection, right? You and I, we kind of did it together. We didn't get an inspector to come in. We knew what needed to be fixed, and we went through it with a fine-tooth comb. But if you're not handy or you don't have that experience, there's nothing wrong with hiring an inspector to come out and inspect your home.
Can I ask you a question about that though?
Sure.
From a disclosure perspective,
Mhm.
are you risking something that might be costly that you're going to fix that another like, I'm not going to say ignorance is bliss, but if you know about it, you're fixing it. If you don't know about it and an inspector finds it, then that's fine. But are you kind of like tempting fate by doing 2 inspections because
Right.
you do have to disclose?
Well, yeah, you do have to disclose if you find something that that is latent. But let me ask you this: would you prefer to find out something when your buyer inspects and you've already gone under contract to buy the dream home that you want to move to,
It's a great point.
and now your deal falls apart? Because
Oh, that's a great point.
some buyers, when they see, oh, there's a leak in the basement, they feel that if I don't get them to put in, get Permaseal to come in and overprice a $30,000 or $40,000, project, then it's not right. And so a lot of your buyers at that point will just run out the back door. And so now you're under contract to buy a place and your sale fell apart. So I think it's more expensive to find out after the fact.
Now, do you ever modulate that based on the homeowner where there's guys, and we've worked with some guys where it's like, this guy maintains his house impeccably. Like he knows everything that's going on. Or is it ever time-based? Like if it was built 3 or 4 years ago, like, do you modulate that? And then is it more like an aesthetic inspection?
Yes.
Aesthetic inspection. Say that 100 times.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, if it's a condo, you probably aren't going to bring in an inspector to do it. Right. But if you have a 100-year-old house, okay, with a foundation that's not poured concrete, it's an older foundation, stone. You've got older mechanicals, you've got old appliances, you've got a roof that you can look at and say, it's probably not brand new, and it's not even midlife. You probably want to get an inspection just to know where you stand. I just think it's a good idea. Now, if it's a condo or it's a brand new construction, 2 or 3 years old, probably not. Probably not. You're probably just looking at cosmetic things at that point.
So, question on that also: how do you get the homeowner in the right mind? Right?
Mm-hmm.
You've used the term once, and I love it, where you're saying it's tough to tell someone they got an ugly baby.
Yes.
Now, this person they've lived in this house a long time, so they've almost got like housing cataracts, right? They can't see the full picture. It's blurry. They think they see it, but someone else comes in and says it's totally different. How do you get them ready to say, you might not like what you're going to hear, but you got to hear it?
Yeah. I do it with diplomacy, but I always try to frame it as return on investment, right? They understand dollars. They know what their goal is for the sale. And if you do it that way, it's less offensive. It's more about, hey, we're on the same side. We're on a team together. Let's do what it takes to get you the money that you want.
Now, how often out of that do you say, well, you know what, this is going to be too hard to get fixed in the time frame. We'll just give them credits and things like that?
That happens, but that happens mainly when people wait till the last minute to start the process, right?
Okay.
So like when you and we talked about your house, it was months ahead of time.
Right.
And
it was still a sprint.
And it still ended up being a sprint. Right. But just imagine if you would have called me 30 days ahead of the time that you actually wanted to list.
Right.
There would have been no way. And then we would have been talking about credits. And here's a little secret, industry secret. Credits are always more expensive than it would be to actually make the repairs. Always.
Right.
Because buyers, they overinflate all these numbers.
Right.
They're thinking, oh, well, this refrigerator needs to be replaced. What's that going to be? $7,000? No. Well, you can go to Apt Electronics and get a decent refrigerator for $2,500. But buyers always overinflate whatever issue there is.
Right.
It's advantageous for them to do so. So they're going to do it.
No, it's a great point. Now, going back to kind of what we were talking about before the steps, and we'll get to step 3 in a minute. Market is changing, right?
Yes.
So you said list early. What are you seeing with your clients? Is inflation hitting what they're trying to do on their house? So like, are they paying more for labor? Are they paying more for material?
Yes.
And what I hear on that is costs more. You may be getting less. That's going to squeeze your profit.
Yes. So the ROI on these projects are going down because of inflation in labor and material. And that's another point where a realtor can at least help you compress the labor costs because they have relationships with contractors, ongoing relationships where they can call in a favor and say, hey, can you help my client and not hurt them too bad? But if you're just like Googling, top 3 guys that are also paying for ads, they're going to charge you more.
Well, and that's if you can get them. I mean, what I'm seeing with some of my investing clients is people don't want small jobs.
Right.
So you got contractors and they're trying to make their summers. They don't want to do a $5,000 bathroom facelift. They want the $30,000. So you may be lucky to get anybody. Better start watching This Old House a little bit.
Please don't do that.
No, you know what? It's good. I actually like watching those shows, not because I'm going to fix certain things, but someone's BSing you. I think I watched right before we sold and bought. I watched a ton of it, and I was like, wow, you know what? There were things I caught just because I was in that mindset, right? Like I was walking through going, okay, probably not going to get money for that, but I know there's something I got to deal with. So I think getting educated on that might be a good thing, right? So because you may hammer a really good realtor and say this guy's full of crap. And then you do some research and you're like, oh, this guy was straight on. And you may have missed out on having someone good represent you.
Right. Labor's up. It's hard to get people to call you back. It's definitely hard to get someone quick. So again, start early. Always start early. If you have the ability to do so, that will save you money and a lot of headaches if you can.
So before we go to commercial, because we got about 2.5 minutes till commercial, let's talk a little bit about 3, and then we'll pick up the rest after the commercial break. So tell me about step 3.
Okay, so step 3 is once you do that pre-inspection, you want to tackle all of the things that are material to the habitability of the home, right? So like the mechanicals, if there's a roofing issue, you might be able to get away with a roof patch job rather than rip off an entire roof. There might be one spot that's damaged, but everything else is fine. You want to tackle those things. Appliances, you want to make sure that, there's not water leaking from the bottom of the refrigerator. There's not, a dishwasher seal problem.
Well, and I would think it's a good time to pull all your warranty stuff, because if you find something, you may not have to pay for it. So keep good records.
True. Yes. Keep good records. But a lot of times, once a refrigerator or a dishwasher starts to go, the warranty is long gone.
Sure.
So just be aware of that. Take care of those things.
I was actually talking more like, remember, like I had my roof thing, right? And the guy who did my roof was like, I'll come out and fix it. And he warrantied it. And it was like, you may forget that you had a certain project done 3-4 years ago. And then you're like, oh, this knob's leaking or whatever. I'm going to get this guy out here because he covers his work, kind of thing.
Right. Which is another reason why you want to proactively go after these things. Because if you don't, then it's a buyer credit. And now you're shouldering the full cost of everything. And it's overinflated because of the buyer's mindset. So
that's awesome. So let's go to commercial real quick. We're going to go to a quick commercial break and pick up the rest of 3, 4, 5 and mistakes after the commercial break.
All right, sounds good.
All right, and we are back. You're listening to Getting Started.life on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. Our guest today, great realtor from Dreamtown, Julius Dickens, great friend of mine and a fantastic realtor. Before the break, we were talking about number 3, and you were talking about like prioritizing, right? Something occurred to me, and this is kind of in conjunction with 3, but I'll be interested in your answer. Is you haven't talked even about a value yet. Like in their mind, someone's got a value, but you haven't even talked about that yet. So talk about that for a minute, if you could.
Right. So, I mean, if we're talking just the value of the home, yes, I think you got to get out there, go to open houses, look at the comps. Your realtor can help you out with that. You've really got to dig in deep to see what your home is worth today. Let me turn this off.
I thought that was me.
That was me. So you want to find out, sorry about that. You want to find out what your home is worth today, right? This very moment, right? You don't want to look two years ago. You don't want to try to stretch beyond what the market is. There's a real reason why realtors are always trying to peg the listing price right to the market today.
There's the value trade-offs, right? Like with me, there's a time like I maybe could have gotten a little more out, but then it didn't fit my timeline.
Right.
And I'd be interested to know how many times sellers come to you and they're like, they want max profit, but they're not willing to. They want max profit in like no time, right? And they're out of whack.
Right. So that's a recipe for a real disaster, right? So if let's say your home is worth $500,000 and you're like, hey, I really feel like the things I've done to my home makes it worth $550. Can we try $550? Some realtors might give in and say, hey, you know what? We'll try whatever you want to try. But a good realtor will try their hardest to get you to go to market at the right price. What buyers tend to believe is that if a house stays on the market now for 15 days, everyone thinks something's wrong with it.
Right. Well, and there's that aspect of also, and they ask me this all the time on refis. Well, I just did all this stuff, which is maintenance, right? It's stuff where, hey, if you don't do that, your condition level drops and it's worth less. They're like, well, I just did all these things. It's like, that's because you own a home and you have to paint it or do certain things. Otherwise, it's not sellable, or you would be getting less than you think because they go to Zillow or they go to anywhere and they look and they put in the specific bedrooms, bathrooms, blah, blah, blah. But they don't, the condition, they're always either off or there's nowhere to put it in.
Right. So the Zillow's estimates don't take into account any condition, right? So, You have people who think, oh, well, I just replaced the refrigerator. Now it's worth $2,500 more. No, you replaced the refrigerator because you can't sell the place without a refrigerator, period.
Right. And the old one might have been a piece of junk.
And the old one was a piece of junk,
Right.
which is why you replaced
Right.
it. So, yes, pricing is important. You got to know the market. And that does kind of figure into how much money you can afford to spend to do these repairs, right? I mean, you have some people that are in a tight spot, and the house is degraded over time. They didn't keep it up. And then on top of that, they're not selling it for a huge profit, and they can really feel the squeeze.
Well, and it is interesting when people, especially my divorce clients, don't think through that about being the cost of sell, right? And they're like, when they're splitting equity and they're listing, that's where I really wouldn't want to be in your shoes from the real estate perspective, because then the fighting always starts about that stuff.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that happen before. I usually try to avoid it like the plague, but it's a rough conversation to have, especially if there's a lot of deferred maintenance, right? It gets difficult. And then you have two people who aren't really speaking to each other, having to speak to each other about who's going to pay for these repairs.
Right. Although I've had some people who work really well together, so that does happen. So now that, and I'm sorry if that screwed up the list, because valuation, I was just interested about that.
Sure.
So after they've figured out what they need to do on it, and kind of, it sounds like got a value, but I'm sure you're not ready to list it at that value yet. What's number 4?
So, we talked about the mechanicals and the structural things that need to be repaired. There's still the cosmetic things that need to be repaired, right? So I'm not a big fan of upgrading a kitchen, with new cabinets and new countertops just to sell. I almost never recommend something like that. But if you have hardware on the kitchen cabinets that need to be replaced because some of them are broken, then that's a good thing to do, right? If you have a carpet that needs to either be steam cleaned professionally, not by you, but professionally, or the carpet replaced, that is high ROI investment, because you do not want your buyers to come into your home and be repulsed by anything they see. If there's paint scuffs, a lot of times, you can do a quick, one coat with the same color and get it to look like new, and that's great. But if you have like blood red walls, you might be paying a professional painter to come in and do 2 or 3 coats to get the proper cover.
I'm totally with you on that one. So it's interesting. You kind of split the structural from the aesthetic.
I do.
Because is it just because more of those are DIY, and is that where it's kind of like, hey, do you want to do this yourself? Or
yeah, I do the structural first. With the money that you have, do the structural first, because if you don't, you may have to sell your home 2 or 3 times to finally close, right? You can go under contract because they don't know the problems behind the walls, but then they get an inspector that comes in, they rip it apart, and the buyer runs. Right. Mm-hmm. And so then you end up having to sell it again.
Right.
Number 2, the buyer may run again. Hopefully you would have learned your lesson by buyer number 3 and actually taking care of those items. So that's
now that house has like a black spot, right?
Right. The market, there's almost perfect information. So when they see that a house has gone on the market, went under contract, fell out of contract, went under contract again, fell out of contract, everyone knows that there's something wrong.
Right. There aren't that many bad buyers out there right now, where that kind of financing would fall through.
Right.
Interesting.
So that's why I like to do the important behind the walls, behind the scenes things first. And then if you have money left over, it's definitely a good idea to do the cosmetic, but you can do that on a budget.
So are you a big fan of the DIY side? Do you tend to try and evaluate the client if they're like, okay, I'll take care of all this stuff? And I mean, evaluate both from skill and timeline, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there are some people who are really good at it, and they're handy and they can do it, and it's going to look amazing, and that's great. But if they don't have the time, so like, let's say they're working a high stress job,
Right.
They've got a couple of kids in the house. They're taking care of young children, or they're taking care of an elderly parent. There are all kinds of things that can really take your time, and you're just never going to meet the timelines. So if that's the case, I may let them try it for a week, right? I'll try it for 7 days. Let's see how this goes, and then I'll go back in and I'll look and see what progress they've made. And if they haven't made any progress, then I need to try to steer the conversation towards getting professionals in to do the work.
Well, and it's funny because I think also the seller will always underestimate, like something like, I'll use as an example, restaining trim. I'm not going to say I know who, but someone was like, this will be easy. A month of weekends later, hands that were permanently brown, even though I was wearing gloves because the holes, I think people underestimate the DIY side of it because it is hard work, and it's really, and if you got a lot to do, you're probably giving up some months.
You know what? And it's harder work, mainly because you don't have the tools that the professionals have.
Right.
Not because you're just not a careful person or you're not good with your hands, but some of these guys have invested $20,000, $30,000 in tools so that they can come in and zip through a job. And here you've given up, 4 weekends of your life, and it really didn't have to happen.
So now they've got a plan. It sounds like, right? It's like, what's number 5? What would you say they do after they figured out what they're going to fix? Sounds like they kind of got a value, but I'm guessing it depends on how that stuff turns out, right? Like if someone DIYs some stuff or just doesn't get it done.
So the cosmetic, I think we can lump in with curb appeal as well. And you did a really good job with your place, taking care of the front of the house with the lawn care and looking at the porch.
That's all my wife. I got to say, she's the landscape architect of the family.
Okay. Well, that explains.
Even the steps, dude, like, remember those steps? They were just falling apart, and we had them completely redone. And that alone, I'm like, okay, that's why it sold in 4 hours and not 4 months.
Right. So being detail oriented on that part of it will help. But this next step, is a tip of the hat to condos and townhomes, right? So if you're in a condo, you have a condo association, right? And with that condo association, you have minutes, you have a budget. You're supposed to have all these documents and be able to provide them to a buyer. Well, I think it's a good idea to look through them early. You want to get them from your management company or the board president if it's self-managed, and you want to look through everything and just make sure that things are in order, right?
I know where you're going. I love this advice.
If there's a big special assessment that's been talked about but hasn't been issued, that could be an issue, right? You want to know that up front. For instance, if the association isn't putting enough money into their reserve fund, which is supposed to be 10% of the yearly budget, is supposed to go into the reserve every year. You want to make sure that is happening. Sometimes it's not happening just because of the way they set up the budget. So with some minor revisions, you can meet that 10% threshold. But sometimes it's just that assessments aren't being collected at an amount that is appropriate for the size of the development. And if that's the case, you want to have that talk a year before you list. Not
right. No, listen, man, you're right on. And I think it's good to point out, because you and I both know Fannie and Freddie, after Miami, when that condo collapsed, and a lot of it was tied to deferred maintenance, they tightened up everything. And that is great advice, because it's not going to be an issue to get the house or the condo ready. And sometimes people don't even know they have a condo. They think it's a townhome. Townhomes and condos, well, townhomes don't exist for lenders, but they think everything's great. They're moving along. All of a sudden they find that there are landmines in the condo docs, and that'll be a deal killer. And the deal might get done, but the buyer's not going to be happy.
Right. There could be a mechanics lien against the association. There's all kinds of things that you really want to understand where your association stands, both with maintenance, both with the money, and the minutes. People shouldn't say crazy things in the minutes.
Yeah. Or they shouldn't contradict.
Right. They should state facts and be truthful, but they shouldn't communicate in hyperbole.
So, question on that: are there times where you come to a potential listing and you're like, there's major things to fix, and you know that's a lot to do, right? That's not in the job description of a realtor. What do you do? How do you approach that for the seller?
Well, I just see, you have to ask them, you know, is this something that you really want to do? Right? Here's all the things that we need to do. Some of it might involve the association. Is this something that you really still want to pursue? And sometimes the honest answer is no. Sometimes people will change their mind and decide to stay where they are, and that's okay.
Right.
They didn't go down a path, an expensive path, and had to change direction midway.
Well, and
So
associations are tough, right? A lot of times they're your neighbors
yes,
and they're volunteering, right? And it's like, you come in guns blazing, all pissed off because stuff wasn't done legit. You're mad, but then they're like, okay, you volunteer and you do it.
right,
And the
right,
hard part is there aren't do-overs. Once an underwriter sees something, it's you're probably out of that, and it might lighten up, right? I think it may at some point, but for now, it's pretty unwavering on it because lenders don't want to buy back those loans, and frankly, lenders don't want to be involved with a development that may result in injury or death for somebody.
sure. I agree wholeheartedly. It can be tough. Self-managed buildings tend to be the ones that run into problems more. But even companies, even some of these property managers just aren't very good at advising these guys. So you have a property manager involved, you have board members involved, and then you have the rank and file unit owners, and things can run afoul. So you want to make sure that you can sell just from a condo standpoint before you go down this path.
So now here's a question for you, and this will be before we go to the mistake, because I've seen a little more of it lately. How often do you ask them about title? Like, hey, is there anything I should know about? Because I've seen sellers who will be like, no one will catch it, right? And you're going through the deal and you're like, hey, you got a mechanic's lien, or you got a list pendants, or you got things that mean you can't sell this.
Right.
And then you're screwed. Like, how do you handle that from your side? Because it's kind of maintenance.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times I have an attorney that I can ask, hey, here's an address. We think there could be a mechanic's lien. Could you look into it and tell me what you see? And he'll give me good advice. And that's another thing that I bring to the table. I work with you as a lender. I work with Harley Rosenthal as an attorney. The great thing about having those relationships is I can pull in these favors to help us at the very beginning. And if you don't have that, then you're kind of shooting in the dark.
No, that makes a whole lot of sense. And that's one thing I think people really don't think about, because sometimes they don't know. And
Right,
then later they're like, oh yeah. And then again, you're dead in the water until that gets resolved.
right. And it could be
Um,
6 months to clear a lien or something like that, and then
right.
that's a real problem.
Or they're like, oh, now I remember why I didn't pay that guy. And then, then you're back to needing to mediate or something.
Yeah.
So biggest mistake, what do you see people right? And I guess it'd be in the macro, but even right now,
Mhm.
biggest mistake they're making.
Well, the biggest mistake I think in real estate, and this has always been as a lister, not knowing the market, right? So we kind of talked about that as a corollary to step three, but not knowing the value of your property before you go into it really kind of leads you down a path that could be unsavory. So, going to open houses, not a bad idea. Go to your neighbor's open house. You'll see what they sell it for, and you'll remember what the inside looked like, and then objectively compare that to what your house is like.
Right.
Right? And that's the hard part, being objective about your home, which you love. And I feel great about my house, right? And I'm a real estate professional. And if I were to go and list it today, I would probably list it too high unless I had somebody else who could be a third party and say, hey, Yours was styled in 2004. It's time to upgrade.
Now, do you think people make that mistake from self-delusion, or is it talking to realtors who just want the listing and are telling them, here's what it's worth? I mean, again, all my neighbors, when I sell my place, it's worth so much more than that. I'm like, not until someone gives me a contract, right? Like, how do you think, what is the primary reason people make that mistake, I guess?
It's hard to say, but I think there's a lot of self-delusion. A lot of it, we all feel that our lifestyle is more expensive than what it really is. I mean, I like my truck, but my truck has a blue book value of probably a few $1,000s. But I love my truck, right?
Right.
And it's just that sort of thing. We value our lifestyle higher than sometimes than what it really is.
No, I think that's valid. I mean, do you think, we talked in the beginning, the market may not crash, but it is going to slow. And I remember when I was going through all this like a year ago, I tell people, hey, if you're going to sell for 5% less, like you said, it's just 5%. It's like, that's 25,000 on $500,000. So like, how should people prepare themselves for not only news that might not be what they want to hear in an up market, but news that they definitely don't want to hear as the market is slowing?
Well, I would say this: don't be in a hurry to borrow against your house. If you're thinking about selling in the next year or two, getting a line of credit for things that aren't necessary is probably not a good idea. I think you want to, continue to pay down your mortgage and pay down your debts and just exercise fiscal discipline. So that if it does soften, it's not the end of the world for you.
Right. No, I totally get it. So I'm hoping this is helping a lot of people. I'm sure it is. But now someone's like, I really love what Julius said. I'm going to call him because he knows what he's talking about. Best way to get a hold of you?
Best way to get a hold of me is my email, jdickens@dreamtown.com. So,
okay.
And then you can always call me, 312-451-8894 is my cell phone. And I always pick up unless I am actually with another client. And, you can always text me there and I'll get right back to you.
Well, and it's funny, I always ask how's the best way to get hold of you, but I've never met a good realtor that is hard to get hold of on the internet. So I'm sure they can find you LinkedIn, website, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And
Google my name,
Chicagoland, right?
Yeah, if you Google my name, all sorts of ways to get a hold of me will come up.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Again, you've been listening to Getting Started.Life on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. Huge thanks today for coming to our show and talking about selling homes to Julius Dickens. Again, all of his information will always be re-shown in the video, but also it'll be in the bottom so you can get hold of him. Thanks for listening. Again, we're Getting Started.Life. If there's something you want to get started, give us a call. Let us know. We'll find the expert. If there's something you want to talk about, let us know within reason. I think we've had some people want to talk about some weird stuff, and I don't know what wide appeal that would have. But also subscribe and share. As I said in the beginning, we're on YouTube. We're on most of the podcast networks, all through the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. But again, now there's a Roku channel, which is really, really cool. And then I also wanted to highlight in June, we used to have some of you are familiar with our old brand, Split Ready. That's no more. I'm launching a content brand called Divorce Housing Pro. So for anybody who's wondering what to do with the house, especially if you're not represented legally and you need help in knowing what to do, or maybe some help with mediation, check out Divorce Housing Pro. So there's some great content there, or there will be when we launch in June. And we can help you get hooked up with the professional to help you. So thanks again. We record every 2 weeks, and we look forward to you listening 2 weeks from now. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Doug.